Welcome to part 1 of programming AWS ElastiCache Redis. In this video we're going to go through the ElastiCache service and look at some of the features of it and where we would actually use it, the common use cases for ElastiCache, and we'll also look at getting some hands-on experience in creating an ElastiCache cluster using the AWS console, and then later on look at connecting to that ElastiCache Redis engine to read and write information to in-memory cache. So ElastiCache, it provides scalable in-memory cache. So that is different to RDS or DynamoDB, which is data that will be persisted for a significant amount of times, basically for as long as you want it to be. So ElastiCache is different in that it's designed for short-term storage of information, and that information to be accessed very quickly. It currently supports the Memcached and Redis open source engines. Now, the common use cases for ElastiCache would be to first of all, to reduce load on your databases. So, for example, you might have a DynamoDB database, and you want to reduce first of all, the latency on that database, so speed up your application. You also want to reduce the amount of reads and writes to that database to reduce your costs, and again, you reduce that load on that database. And the way you would do that is that just the same as in DynamoDB, you would have storage of keys and objects of keys. The same you can do with for example, ElastiCache Redis, what we're going to be using in this lab. And that will enable you to have high-speed access to that data, which will be in memory, and you can put an expiry time on that data so that it doesn't cost you significantly. And then once you've finished using it, the short term, it goes back. It will be then accessed into that long-term DynamoDB storage. Another very good use case is to manage application session state. So what we mean by that is if you have a look at the diagram there on the right hand side, we can see that we've got a user who he or she is connected in through an Elastic Load Balancer, and will be connected to one of 4 EC2 instances. So in this situation, the person is connected into the first EC2 server, and they might be on a game that has high score data. They might be filling out some user profile data in a form or whatever. So that's temporary session state storage that we want to maintain, but we don't want to maintain forever, but we want to maintain that in the short term. So what happens, for example, if that EC2 instance falls over, or that EC2 instance is part of an auto-scaling group that scales down, and all of a sudden that user is taken from that first EC2 instance, and then they're rerouted into the second EC2 instance. All of a sudden that user has lost that information that would have, it might be a high score of a game, it might be form data that has been lost. So that creates a lot of problems or it creates a lot of frustration for an end user, and it doesn't provide a very good user experience. So we can actually manage that session state when we've got auto-scaling instances behind a Elastic Load Balancer, or auto-scaling groups behind an Elastic Load Balancer, and that will make sure that when that back-end scaling is going on, that the user won't have a bad experience from that. So the first thing we need to do is to create a security group for our Redis cluster, and that security group needs to be set up so that it can allow our web servers to communicate with that Redis cluster. So the easiest way to do that is here. I've just gone through and created a security group. I won't go through how to create a security group. By this stage of the course, you know how to do that. I'll just be boring you to death by going through the process there. So mainly what we've got here is a custom TCP rule that is on the port range of 6379, which will be the port range for your ElastiCache, will be the port for your ElastiCache Redis cluster. And the source is going to be the web server security group there. So we're just allowing inbound on that, and the same on the outbound. We're going to allow Okay, so we're going to allow everything, destination all, on the outbound. And so that's all we need to do. That the details of that are in the lab notes for this video. So just make sure that you set up that security group first, that Redis SG security group. Okay, so just jumping into the ElastiCache console, we can see here we've got no clusters created yet, so we just have the introduction screen. So before we create an ElastiCache cluster, we need to have a cache subnet group to launch that into. So we click on here on the left hand side before we click on getting started. We click on cache subnet groups, and we click on create cache subnet group. And so I've already created one here, and I won't go through the process again. It's all detailed in the lab notes. So I've just got here is that it's in US East 1, and that's its details there. So we've created that that subnet group for our cache, and then we can use that to launch into launch our cache cluster into that. So again, the details on how to do that are very, very straightforward. I won't go into that, and it's detailed in the lab notes. So just going back to the ElastiCache dashboard. Okay, so now we click on Get Started Now. And we select our Redis, not Memcache, so we select Redis and click Next. Okay, so we won't enable replication here. We'll leave that off to keep it simple, but in a real application, you would probably look at multi-AZ. So we'll leave that off there for now. And then we'll give our cluster a name. Okay, so by default, it comes up with a large instance. So for a lab, we don't want that. We don't want to get a big bill at the end of the month. So we'll jump down to a T2 micro, which seems a little bit more suitable for us. We leave S3 location of our Redis RDB file. We'll leave that empty. So click on Next. Okay, so this is where we're going to select our cache subnet group. So there it is there. And our availability zone, we'll leave that with no preference, that's fine. And our security group. So we need to select our Redis SG security group that we created previously in the VPC console. So no preference for maintenance window. We'll disable any SNS notifications. We'll click on Next. And then we have a review of what we've got there. So we'll launch that cache cluster now. Okay, it's currently being created. We'll just close out of that, and we can see where we're currently being created. So that's coming along nicely, so we'll just leave it there for now for the first part of our ElastiCache lab. And in our next part, we're going to look at connecting into our ElastiCache Redis cluster and read and write data to that, and see how that works, and see how we can use some of these Redis commands to get information in and out of our cluster. So I'll see you in part 2.